The movie begins with some people speaking off-screen. They are doing some experiment on a pig. From the sound of it, the experiment did not turn out too successful. After the opening credits, we see a university in California. Two females enter a building and then into a room. One of them, Eva, stands behind a camera and records as two doctors sit and become part of the video. The male introduces himself as Dr. Frank Walton, and the female is Dr. Zoe McConnell. Frank mentions the Lazarus project and then speaks of their accomplishments. After he has finished describing the technical aspects of the machine, we come to suspect that it is a sort of revival device. In the next scene, the work area looks relaxed. Two males play a board game with each other, Clay and Nico. Then they speak about Eva and how much Clay likes her. Eventually, we see Zoe working alone. She puts on opera music and sits in the dark looking into her monitor. Then, suddenly, the music turns off and Zoe turns around. When she turns her head back, Nico is there to scare her with a pig mask on his face. She does not get angry with him. Instead, we just see them eat sushi later. Zoe sleeps in the following scene. She has a nightmare of a burning house. Then she wakes up. Frank comes to her and asks if it was the same dream. She tells him that it was. On the next day, they are all there working. They have some difficulty with a certain technical problem, but then Clay helps by offering his advice. Frank states that his advice might work. We then see a dog on their working table. They try some procedures on it, but they do not bring satisfactory results. Then Eva says she saw the dog move somewhat, but Zoe tells her that what she saw is to be expected. The experiment is considered a failure, and then the dog suddenly gets up and starts barking. They all get startled by this, but then the dog and they calm down. Zoe then notices something interesting. The dog's cataracts are gone. Frank tells her that it cannot be, but she shows him. Frank then tells them all not to talk about this phenomenon until they know what it is. They celebrate afterward. Frank and Zoe are with the dog in the next scene. Frank tells her that the dog, Rocky, could be in shock now. It could take a few days for its brain to reorganize. Then Zoe says that what if they took it out of something like a dog heaven? Frank later states that it could be questionable what they do, but it will help a lot of people. Later on, we see Zoe sleeping in bed again. While she does, Rocky enters the room and gets on top of the bed with her. It very creepily stands there and looks at Zoe for some time. Then on another day, the crew is together at work. Eva asks if the dog remembers dying. Clay tells her that it does not because dogs don't have memories. He and Nico then argue about it and what a memory even is. Then when those two leave, Frank says to Eva that before someone dies, the brain releases a lot of DMT, which is the strongest psychedelic on the planet. That could explain religious experiences. Zoe disagrees with him, and they somewhat argue. Zoe then states that the DMT might be there to help the souls move on. She adds that it's arrogant to reduce death to just a single chemical equation. After that, we see Rocky getting placed in a scanning device. They watch its brain on a monitor. Then Clay says that the dog could go crazy based on what he notices in the brain stem. He is then left alone with the animal. It sits in a cage while he sits at his computer. He grabs a drink and starts drinking, and instantly hears a loud noise. This causes him to spit his drink out. He calls out for Nico, but no one answers him. This prompts Clay to get up and see what is going on. He walks by the refrigerator and sees how its contents are messily laid out on the floor. And then he sees how the dog cage is open and that Rocky is absent. He walks along, searching for the dog and calling out to it. When he kneels to look under somewhere, it scares him by appearing when he looks back up. He gets taken aback and falls to the floor. Later, he tells the crew that the dog needs to be put down. He tells them that it behaved like it was possessed. Zoe states that Clay is overreacting, but then Eva says that it's very odd how Rocky could have possibly reached an item that was high on a shelf somewhere. The next scene has Frank watching some footage of Rocky. While he does, he speaks into a recorder, describing the several phases of the revival. Shortly after, Zoe comes behind him and scares him. She asks him if he is going to bed, but he tells her he's in the middle of something. On the next day, Frank and Zoe enter the university. The security at the front desk tells Frank that the dean wants to see him. He speaks with her and she scolds him for his experiments. She tells him that most people are religious, and such experiments will create a negative reaction from them. But Frank says that this has nothing to do with religion. They then argue for a while, and eventually Frank says that science works by adapting. But the dean tells him that he's not adapting. What he is doing is playing God with lifeless animals. This prompts him to ask her how she knew of the trials, and she says that they have a right to look at whatever connects to their server. But he tells her that most likely someone showed it to her. Then many personnel come to the room where the crew works. They start confiscating many things. So he tells the man in charge that they operate by a grant from a certain company. But he tells her that the ownership has shifted to their company. He adds that there are always consequences for breaking the rules. Later, Frank comes and asks them what happened. Zoe tells him that they took everything. And then later, outside the university, she says to Eva that as soon as she appeared, this happened to them. Frank then tells them how this could have happened. And Nico responds by saying that they could not have spent $50 million just to get their serum. Frank then has a plan to duplicate the experiment. He tells them all they still have about 12 hours before they could no longer use their lab. But Clay questions how they could duplicate it without the serum that was taken. At that point, Zoe takes out one package that was kept just in case. Night comes, and Eva enters the university. She then opens some back entrance for the rest of the crew. They all enter the lab, and Nico even uses his computer to stop the security cameras from catching them. They get set up to perform the experiment, and Zoe pulls the lever to supply the power. But when she does, the lights turn off. A power surge took place. When they turn back on, they find Zoe on the floor. Frank comes to her and says that she has been electrocuted. Afterwards, they all start giving her the proper procedure to bring her back to well-being. Frank tells them that she has no pulse. He tells them to increase the joules. All of them are scared, and upping the joule count did not help bring her back. While she lies there not living, Frank looks at her ring and takes it from her finger. Then he places her on the revival bench. The others see it and instantly protest against it. But Frank tells them that the serum works, and that's all he needs to know. Clay asks him what if Zoe comes back messed up like Rocky. To that Frank says he will perform the experiment differently. They keep arguing with him, and then he tells them to leave so he could do it by himself. After some time of standing around, however, they decide to help him. They get Zoe into the proper position and put the serum in her temple. Then Eva activates the switch, but nothing happens. Frank then tells them that they're doing it again with more kilovolts, but again nothing happens. Shortly after, Nico does not see the guard on the monitor and asks where he is. Frank states that he does not care and that they're doing it again. Then Nico finds the guard and says he's coming for their room. This causes them to panic and hide. Frank covers Zoe before getting down himself. When the guard arrives outside the room, he looks through the window and spots nothing in the room. Then he walks away. After that, Frank peeks out of the room to check if he's gone for good, and when he goes back and he sees Zoe sitting with the cover on her, they all become amazed and then take the cover off. Zoe looks odd and lifeless, and Frank informs them all that she is in shock. Suddenly then, she grabs Frank's arm swiftly and with strength, and asks him if she died. After some time passes, Frank does a few checkups and tells her that she is okay. Then Eva asks her what it was like if Zoe saw anything. When she asks this, Zoe gets a flashback of that house that appeared in her dreams. Frank then says that this is not the best time for this. He tells them they need to break down the lab and do the diagnostics, and then get out of there as soon as possible. Later, they get Zoe in the scanner. As they observe the monitor, Clay says that something is not right. He says that the body is healed and that there's too much neural activity. Frank looks at it and agrees. Then he tells them to get her out of there. While they do, Nico looks at the brain on the monitor with Eva. They see that her entire brain is lit up. Later on, Frank sits Zoe down and tells her he will take care of her. He says he thought he lost her, and she tells him that he did. To that, he responds that he didn't. Then he takes out the ring that he took off. He puts it on a necklace along with a cruciform. Then he starts putting it around her neck. As he puts it on, Zoe hears him say that something is definitely wrong. She asks him about it, but he says that he did not say anything. Then Zoe looks at a pen on the table and it moves. As Frank tries telling her something, she finishes his sentence for him. He gets spooked by this and tells her that he has to check on something before he leaves that room. When she is there by herself, Zoe looks at the pen and it moves again. She keeps looking at it, and it keeps moving. Then she looks at her crew through the window. As she looks at each one of them, she could hear their respective thoughts. She hears that Frank thinks that there is something wrong with her, but that they should tell her that everything is fine. Zoe then looks at her fingers, and they are blackened at the top. Later, she puts them in water at the sink and gets shocked. It happens a second time as well. Then the mirror in front of her shatters. Her reflection differs in the shattered part from the non-shattered part. Rocky then comes in and starts growling at her, but Zoe looks at it for a while, and it starts to whimper. We then see Frank looking through a microscope. While he does, Zoe comes behind him and tells him that something is wrong. After she says that, she vomits. She tells him that she's changing, that she can see and hear things. Then she shows him her hand, but we see that it looks normal. Afterwards, she tells him about the burning house, but Frank says that it's not real. Zoe tells him that she was stuck there for a long time. However, he says she was gone for less than 1 hour, but her response is that it's been years. Frank, trying to be grounded in reality, mentions that it was the DMT in her brain that caused her experience. But Zoe disagrees and says it was hell. She says that hell is living your worst moment in life over and over again without waking up. Frank reassures her and says that she is now awake and fine. We then see him injecting her with something. He tells her that it will help her sleep. She sleeps on the couch. Then Eva comes to her and covers her with a blanket. When she tries to leave, however, it appears that she entered Zoe's nightmare. She walks the hallway of that building. Then she calls out to Frank and Zoe. She asks if they can hear her. Then she approaches a door and sees fire from the opening. After that, she turns around and sees a little girl standing in the hallway. Eva asks her if the little girl knows where they are. Then the hallway lights turn off and everything goes white. Eva witnesses some dolls burning and then screams. She wakes up after that and the others come to her. She is lying in a different location now from where she was when she entered the nightmare. Then she starts walking away while crying. Frank asks her what happened and she tells him that she was somewhere else. She starts telling them where she was. And when Eva starts mentioning the fire, Frank feels uneasy. She tells them there were people there that could not get out. Then Nico asks her what is on her arm. She looks at it and says that that is where she was grabbed. This prompts Clay to ask Frank what is going on. But Frank says that Zoe must have told her. Clay asks him what was told. Frank then starts explaining what happened to Zoe a long time ago. He mentions the building and the fire, and how it was all part of Zoe's past. He adds that she has nightmares about it to this day. Eva then gets asked if that is what she saw, and she confirms that it was. This causes Nico to ask Frank how this could possibly be. Eva then starts offering her hypothesis about how Zoe's soul might not have gone through. She says that what if she is stuck in her nightmare? At that point, Frank loses it and says that Eva is lying. He starts walking away after that. Later on, Clay says to Eva that Zoe's brain is doing things that it wasn't designed to do. We then see Zoe lying on the couch and saying a prayer in her sleep with some intensity. After that, Nico calls Frank over and tells him that someone has been watching them for months through their computer. Frank tells him that it could be the school, but Nico states that the school does not need to, and that it's someone else. Frank then says that they either know or will know very soon that they are in the lab. This makes him tell his crew that they need to get out of there as soon as possible. While they search for the dog that became lost again, Zoe engages in her nightmare. She rips off her necklace in her sleep and starts floating up from the couch. Then her eyes turn black. Nico feels that something is wrong, so he goes to check on her. He sees that she is not on the couch. As he looks for her and calls her name, she comes behind him and says she needs his help. She tells him to make her feel normal, and then she starts kissing him. Unable to accept this in her traumatized form, Nico pushes her away. When he starts telling her something, she finishes his sentence for him like she did with Frank. Then she says how she tried to do everything well in her life, yet still ended up in hell. Her eyes turn black again and she disappears. Shortly after, Nico gets thrown in a locker with her power. Zoe then approaches it and makes it implode. We see that he very likely loses his life. Later, the rest of the crew comes to her as she lies on the couch. They ask where Nico is, but Zoe can't help them with that. This prompts Clay to decide to call security. Frank tries to stop him, but Clay tells him that he's done with all this. Frank then tells him about the horrible thing that could happen to Zoe if someone finds out about her. After he says that, Zoe hears him think that that is what he would do. Clay starts calling, and then a blackout happens, preventing the call. After that, Frank and Clay try to leave the building, but find that all the doors are closed shut. Meanwhile, Eva sits alone with Zoe. She feels uncomfortable with how Zoe looks at her, and gets up to find Nico. As she walks away, Zoe tells her what Eva's thoughts are in general. Then Frank comes in and says that this place shut down tightly because it detected something wrong. Eva then asks Zoe what she did, but Zoe says she did nothing. This causes Eva to lose her control. And then Clay approaches Zoe and demands that she tell him what happened to Nico. He does not get an answer, so he repeats himself with force. This makes Zoe use her power to shoot his pointing pen into his mouth. He starts choking, and Frank and Eva tend to him while Zoe just sits there. Eventually, after trying for a good number of seconds, Frank manages to take the pen out with some tweezers. Then he turns to look at her and gets disturbed by her calm demeanor. The lights go out instantly after that, and Zoe disappears again. Frank and Eva panic. Zoe then appears and lifts many objects in the room with her mind. Afterwards, we see that some disturbance was caused because Frank helps Eva get up. They then start searching for weapons. After Frank finds a bottle, Eva tells him that Zoe eliminated Nico. While they stand in that room, a covered person sits up and scares them, causing them to run away. Then Frank presents the bottle to her and says that they use it to put down lab animals. He adds that if he does not make it, then she cannot allow Zoe to leave here. And then he heads off. Walking in the hallway, Frank spots a figure standing there. He approaches it and asks if it is Zoe. While he walks, he holds the syringe with the contents from the bottle. He says that he just wants to talk to her. She appears next to him and asks why he has the syringe then. Her words make him put it down. He speaks to her and tells her that he's sorry. He tells her that he will fix this mess, and Zoe asks him if he still loves her. After saying that he does, she grabs his head with both hands and investigates if that is the truth. His internal thoughts end up contradicting what he said to her, and that causes Zoe's eyes to turn black. She holds his head and uses her power to take his life away. Later, we see Zoe sit on the bench and inject more of the serum into herself. Then Eva prepares a few syringes with the deadly substance. She puts them in her shoe. After that, she hears her name being called. She walks into the lab shining her flashlight and calls out to Zoe. Then opera starts playing. Eventually, Eva locates the record and stops it. Afterwards, she continues to search in panic. She takes out one syringe and Zoe appears upside down, scaring Eva. Then she uses her power to throw Eva into her nightmare. While there, Eva closes the door on Zoe. Then she sees the little Zoe and comes to her. She takes matches from her hand and asks her if she did it. Then she states that she did, that Zoe started that fire. Shortly after, the adult Zoe comes out from a room. She looks slightly burnt. While she walks toward them, Eva tells the young Zoe that it's not her fault and that she could stop this. She tells the little girl to open the door. When she opens it, a white light appears, and Eva sticks the syringe into Zoe. After some seconds of being affected by it, Zoe states that she's sorry. Then Eva sticks another one in her. Zoe falls down, and it is possible that she has been ended. Then from a distance, we see that a firefighter runs to Eva's rescue. He comes to her and asks if she is okay. Eva cries while saying that Zoe eliminated everyone. Then she looks at the area where Zoe is supposed to be lying, and sees that she is not there anymore. Eva then looks at the fireman, and much to her chagrin, it is Zoe instead. She then puts Eva to eternal sleep. The final scene has Zoe placing Frank on the operating bench and injecting the serum into his head. After a few seconds, he wakes up in shock.